Okay, let's go. We are in siman ayin vav. We're in siman ayin vav. We're up to sif aleph, starting in the beginning. We're now transitioning to the dinei hatfilos b'Shabbos u'b'Yom Tov. So these are halachas that have to do with davening. We won't spend too much time on it, hopefully, but it's interesting. I think a lot of it we don't know, so it's always good. Sif siman ayin vav sif aleph. Siman ayin vav. This is on page. If you're in the new Shulchan Aruch, it's on page Reish Ayin Daled. That's it. It's on page Reish Ayin Daled. Okay. Sif Aleph. Noyagin. Yes, when you write the Reish Ayin, instead of writing Reish Ayin, which means Ra, bad, you switch it around to Ayin, and then Daled Reish or whatever it is. But if I'm telling you the page number, it's like saying 74 200. So instead you say Reish, which is 200, Ayin Daled. But when you write it the other way around. No, I want to get started. Not yet, not yet, not yet. Not yet, please. Sif Aleph, Siman Ayin Vav. Says the Kitzur like this: Noigin lahaktim tfilas arvis shel Shabbos yoser mib'meisel chol. There's a minhag that we have that we like to daven ma'ariv earlier on Friday night than you do during the week. In other words, you want to take in Shabbos as soon as you can. The Kitzur says it's a very good thing. Why? Kedei lahaktim kabbalah Shabbos b'chomad efshar. This way you could take in Shabbos as early as you could, rak, with the condition sheyehem yiplaga mincha l'mayla. It needs to be from Plaga Mincha and on. So in other words, you can't take in Shabbos before Plaga Mincha, as we spoke about by Shabbos candles. If you do it before Plaga Mincha, it basically doesn't count, and you have to redo it, right? So same thing with davening Ma'ariv. If you do it too early, it doesn't count. It's not connected. Let's say you have a person that generally they daven Ma'ariv only after the Zman, after Tzeisik Chavim. So usually they wait till it's dark. In other words, the way they paskin is that really Ma'ariv should only be once it's dark. Nevertheless, he says the Hainu, which is usually B'Tzizik Chavim, it doesn't matter. When it comes to Shabbos, you could do it early because it's a separate mitzvah. You want to do Isaf for Shabbos and all the different things like that, so you're allowed to do that. Now, even if there are times that you mamish daven mincha exactly the same time. So Thursday night you had a minyan, you daven mincha, let's just say 6 p.m. And then Friday night you're davening ma'ariv at 6 p.m. So what is it? Is it mincha or ma'ariv? So over here he says, doesn't matter, in Choshim Tzilas Arvish al Shabbos, it doesn't make a difference for Friday night. And for Friday night you could change. Why? Because you're also following with the mitzvah. However, the condition is, as we spoke about, that same day, you shouldn't daven mincha after plaga mincha also, right? And then daven ma'ariv. Because as we spoke about, there's a machlokes between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. Remember about when you could daven ma'ariv till. It goes by the carbon shel bein arba'im. So some say Chachamim said you could do it all the way till Chachamim said you could do it till tzeis. So mincha goes till tzeis till night, and then you daven ma'ariv. Rabbi Yehuda disagreed, and he said plaga mincha. Okay, so b'payol we don't paskin like any. We paskin like both. So you could do either. So the question, but you can't do both at the same time. So right. So therefore, Friday night, if you're going to daven mincha after plaga mincha, then fine. You're paskining today like the chachamim that you could daven mincha till tzei. So then you can't daven ma'ariv. It's not night yet. You can't do both. But on the other hand, if you daven mincha before plag, then you could say today I'm paskining like Rabbi Yehuda, and I'm going to daven ma'ariv after plaga mincha. That you could do. So the Kitzur said, the Alter Rebbe says, you can that day daven mincha achar plaga mincha, right? Because then you'll be doing what's called tarti desisri. Remember, two things that are contradicting. And also, if you say Kriya Shema early before Tzeis, when you get home before you make Kiddush, you should do that as well. Now, I told you that even though the minhag Chabad number one is we try to always daven ma'ariv after the Zman, for those that can, that's the accepted minhag. However, it's also accepted that people rely on a Mishnah Brura who explains that even though in one place he says you really shouldn't do this, but elsewhere he says that there is a minhag that people have when you have, let's say, out-of-town minyanim, things like that, where you're not going to be able to get the people to go and come for mincha ma'ariv and sit there for an hour and a half. So therefore, they'll daven mincha after plaga mincha, and they'll also daven ma'ariv before shkia. So in other words, they're doing both of them during that time period, and they have what to rely on. So based on this Mishnah Brura, so people do this all the time. We gave another hatter that you could also do if you're worried about this and you daven mincha late. Technically, you could have your suda before ma'ariv. You could do your Suda, make Kiddush, and then daven Ma'ariv later. Again, I wouldn't suggest it, especially for those that are not used to it, because it's very likely that you'll end up forgetting, which would be a big problem. Okay, sit base. The birchas hashkivenu. So as we know in davening, we say always hashkivenu before Shemoneh Esrei and Ma'ariv. So over there, ein choismin kamay b'chol shemer Ama Yisrael. We don't end off like we usually do during the week. During the week, we say shemer Ama Yisrael. What's the bracha of shemer Ama Yisrael? Shemer. What's shemer mean? Hashem guards us. Right, so why don't we do that Friday night? Instead, we say, Right, so in other words, what we normally say would be, one second. What we normally say would be, V'hagin ba'deinu, v'hasar me'aleinu, oyev, dever, v'cherev, v'rav, v'yagin, all that stuff. And then you make a bracha, shemer es Ama Yisrael la'ad. Ma'shenkein, Friday night, we don't do that. Instead, we end off by, Freis aleinu sukkah shalei mecha, baruch atah Hashem, Freis, so we leave out the whole thing, all about all these issues that we're dealing with, basically, and Hashem protects us. Why do we leave that out? Because this bracha is not a personal bracha that you're asking Hashem for you. It's a bracha you're asking for all the Yidden. And therefore, Klalos Am Yisrael einam tzrichim shmira b'Shabbos. Yidden don't need shmira on Shabbos as a community. Because the Shabbos protects us. So therefore, we don't do that. So what do we do instead? As we said, and the same thing by Yom Tif. So if you look at the bottom, he says that this part we stand for. Right, so you rise for that last bracha, and in the Kitzur, he said inside the plim over here in ours, it says from the Alter Rebbe, the Nusach Rabbeinu, according to the Alter Rebbe, Gam v'hagin ba'deinu kikel shemreinu ma'atzleinu wata inemrim b'lei Shabbos Yom Tov. You leave out that part of the bracha as well. Again, you look in the Siddur, it's all there. Now, im tov v'siyim kamei b'chor. Let's say a person you made a mistake. So it happens very often, as we'll see later also, that your mouth kind of works on its own. You go by what you're used to. So you started just saying it, and you started saying the weekday one. So if that's the case, and you finish the way it is weekday, so if you remember right away, you said Shemer Ama Yisrael La'ad, right? So then, what do you do then? So then it's okay. Yomer Miyad, right away you should right away say Hapoyne Sukkah Shalom V'Goymer. But Avayim Lo Niskar Ad La'achar K'nei Dibur. But let's say you only remember till a few seconds later. So then then you don't switch to the Shabbos. You said the one for weekday. It's okay. I mean, you asked for Shmira. It's not the end of the world. We don't need to. We try to make a very precise tefillah, so you don't need it on a Shabbos because, as we said, Yidden as a whole don't need it. But if you did, it wouldn't disqualify your tefillah, so you leave it and you move on. Okay, Siv Gimel. Noigin leimer betfilas arvis v'yenuchu va ubeshachris ubemusaf yenuchu voy ubemincha shabbos kachecha v'yenuchu vam. Anyone notice that when you daven? So you have three different lashonos. Now, the difference is like this. Okay, so that's the three things. Now, if you look at them, v'yenuchu va is lashon tekeva. V'yenuchu voy is lashon zachar. V'yenuchu vam is lashon nam. So basically, the Rebbe brings, and it's based on an Arizal, also in Shulchan Aruch and the Magen Avram, where he explains the difference of lashonos. But there's a few things we know is that there's different gedarim of different hamshachas at different times throughout Shabbos. So, for example, Friday night, you're resting from work. That means the whole week you're working, and Friday night you're now relaxing from work. So this is called, why is it, so it's called Lashon Nekeva. Why? Because the Nekeva is a makabel, she's receiving. So the whole week you're sort of working, and the rest that you have on Friday night is as a result of something else outside of the work. Shabbos morning is Lashon Zachar. Why is it Lashon Zachar? Because now you weren't working last night. You're not resting from working. You weren't working. So now you're resting for the etzem inyan of rest. So it's a different gather of Shabbos observance. And later on, when it comes closer to Mincha, so then you do it in Lashon Nabim. Again, these all have to do with different elements and different things that are what do you call it? That are happening there. That has to do with different madregas. Okay. But that's it. So now you'll know when you say it, it's not stam that they made a different thing. There's a reason why it's different, and there's a reason why it's all different all three times. And that's the way we do it. Siv Dal. Achar tfilas halachash ba'arvis Shabbos. So when you finish Shemoneh Esrei Friday night, Oimrim kulam b'yachad vayachulu. Everyone says vayachulu. So we say vayachulu Friday night 3 times. Okay, why do we say 3 times? How do you say 3 times? Number 1, you say it in Shemoneh Esrei. Number 2, you say it after you say it after Shemoneh Esrei, which is when you do what's it called? When you do the Vayechulu after, yeah? And then you do it another time by Kiddush, right? By Kiddush also, you say Yom HaShishi, which is the end of one pasuk, and then Vayechulu Hashemayim, which is the next pasuk. So you end up saying Vayechulu 3 times Friday night, and there's an inyan of how we do it or whatever. So now v'yesh lo amroi ma'umin. Minig is when you do say this, you should say it standing. Why do we say it standing? The fee because there's an Indian what.
It's unhinged, Rabbi. It was so good to while we're sleeping.
Okay, so you say Vayechul 3 times. Now, v'yesh lo amroi ma'umin, you should say it standing. The fee when we say Vayechulu, it's brought down in different places that it's as if we're giving edus that Hashem created the world, and therefore when you give edus, edim have to stand when they give edus. Okay, so now like this, so you're giving edus. Now on this you have the Kitzur Shulchan of Chaim Noah who says that you should actually say this with someone else. So there is a minute, even if you're doing it by yourself, by the way, also, but you should stand next to someone else. I remember when I was in LA, I was I worked in the yeshiva over there, and there was an older guy that lived there then. It could be still does, I don't know, but interesting character. But he would like stand next to me, wait till I was finished davening, so he could say it together with me. But there is an Indian. I don't know how much of a big deal. You don't see people walking over to someone like to say with them. If you're staying with a minion, I guess you don't really have to. But there's an Indian, you say it together as they stay. But one more thing also, like someone mentioned over there, that if you say Vayechulu, it's brought down that Ma'ilel Avakasov, the pasuk considers it that as Ki'ilu Nasa Shutef HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Maaseh Bereshis. It's as if you became a partner with Hashem in creating. And so this explains the whole idea of that you're giving edus that Hashem created it, and now you're going to stop working. You're showing that the same way Hashem worked, we work, and we do the same avodah of making the world into Adira, turning it over, the Kedusha, all that stuff. Okay, the Kitzur, it's a davening, it's an important tefillah, and you do it standing next to someone else if you could, but lav dafka, you have to go that far, but we say it 3 times. Okay, now, that is, so if you're looking at a siddur, in Kiddush, so if you're looking at a siddur, that would be the first thing of Vayechulu, okay? What do you do after Vayechulu? You have a bracha, right? Vayechulu, everyone says, and then you say, Baruch Adonai Hashem, right? So what's that? So take a look in Sif. So that's Sif Hey. So Sif Hey says like this: that Achar Kach, after you do this tefillah of Vayechulu or these psukim, so then Omer Shliach Tzibur, then the Chazan comes and he makes a bracha achas me'ein sheva. He does, it's like a short Shemoneh Esrei. Yeah, the same way he'll do a bracha achas me'ein sheva, the way we do, let's say, Shemoneh Esrei and Shabbos in general. So he'll do one after Shemoneh Esrei again. Right? The Hainu Baruch Atah Hashem L'keinu V'Sinu Magen Avram Magen Aves L'keinu V'Sinu U'Mesayim Baruch Atah Hashem L'Kadosh Shabbos. Now, okay, so he does this whole thing again. Now I'll explain in a second why. Now V'yesh La'Kol Lamed B'Shosh Shliach HaTzibur Omer Bracha Zos. The community should stand when he says it. V'yishmu Heidim, and they should listen. Now, in addition to listening to his bracha, also Noyagin Sha'omrim Imoy Magen Aves Ad Zeichel L'Maaseh Bereshis. It also became our minhag that we also say Magen Aves. Okay, so if you think about it like this, Vayechulu is one thing everyone says that you always say. Then you have the bracha that goes from Baruch Atah Hashem till Mekadesh Shabbos. So over there, the Chazan says most, but we say the middle paragraph with him. So if you don't think about what you're doing, it's like we say together, then the Chazan says, then we say, then he says. But if you think about what's happening, Vayechulu, everyone says. Then there's a bracha that really the Chazan says. But we happen to say together, the minhag is to say the middle thing with him. The Galam Nispal B'Yichidus, and therefore someone is davening by themselves. Also, Yachal Leimar Magen Aves, they could also say Magen Aves as well. Ad Zecher Ma'aseh Bereshis. You could do the same thing, right? But the bracha part of it you don't do. So that's the minhag. If you're davening by yourself, you say Vayechulu, and you'll say, because that has nothing to do with the minyan, basically, and then you'll do Magen Aves also. Now, why do we do this bracha Achas Mein Sheva? So the reason why we do the bracha Achas Mein Sheva is basically like this: that the shoals used to be outside the city, and you'll see why this is important. But if the shoals are outside the city, so during the week, either not everyone would go to shul. That's one way I saw it written, or maybe they would go, whatever it was, they would go with lights or candles. I don't know. When it came to Shabbos, basically everyone would go home. There's nothing to hang around for. So they would all go home. And what would happen is if you had one or two people that were late, they would be davening by themselves in shul. Now, when shul is over, they'd have to walk home by themselves from outside of the city. Now, in those days, when the minhag started, they still had mazikin, they still had shadim, and therefore they were afraid of like injuries or bad things could happen to the people who are walking by themselves home from shul when it's dark outside and etc. So therefore, Chachamim said, you know what? Let's add a birchas achas mein sheva, which in this way, number one, for people that don't know how to daven, like a regular Shemini Esrei, you have the Chazaras Hashatz. So number one, we'll have a little Chazaras, mini Chazaras Hashatz. And number two, for those that are going to walk home by themselves, they should be able to walk with others. Right? It'll take a few extra minutes. In the meantime, they could catch up Shemini Esrei, and then you don't have to say Vayichulu Magen Aves and the bracha. That's the chazan and the minyan. So you'll be up to the minyan, and then you could walk home with them. So those are some of the reasons. That's the reasons why. Now it's important for us to remember that. Keep that in mind. Okay. Now, Siva, you had a question? Siva. B'chol Shabseis Hashana Oimrim Bracha Zeis. On all Shabbosim of the year, we say this. Right? You say Vayichulu, yeah, okay. So you do this on all weeks. Even if it was a Yom Tif that leads into Shabbos or this, in other words, really, you don't need to do it then because everyone's still staying there, especially if it's a Pesach, you're doing halal or whatever. If it's a Yom Tif, then people could carry candles maybe or whatever it was. Lav Dafka, they can have the same problem. But nevertheless, you do it anyways to make that there shouldn't be any difference. The exclusion would be specifically Yom Tov Rishon of Pesach. Then okay, so that we go straight into Halal, then we go straight to Ma'ariv. Yitaka don't do it. So that's a little detail that even if it's Friday night, you wouldn't do it. Which this year it's not. It's a 3-day Yom Tov. Yeah. Me'ain means similar to, Sheva means 7. So a regular Shemini Esrei has 7 brachas in the middle, basically, that you do Shabbos, right? So this way it's a Me'ain Sheva. It's like it's not exact. It's like one bracha that includes all of them. Well, what? It's a that's why it says Magen Aves because you're doing the bracha of Aves and Mechaya Mesim, right? Kadosh goes through. Yeah. So that's what it's called. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Now, let's finish off this last thing, which is very interesting, like this. That this is we're in Siv Zayin now. This whole thing you only say when you have an established minyan that you always gather in the same place and you always daven Friday night. But let's say you have a place that you don't generally have a minyan. It's a pop-up minyan. Let's say someone has a Sheva brachas, so they're davening at home. That's not a constant minyan. So then, like he says, so then then you don't say it. 1 second. Now it says the Alter Rebbe, if it's a place that has a minhag that they do say it, so don't stop them from doing it. Okay, hold on. Now let's say there's a place where they're going to have a few weeks that they're going to be there. For example, let's say Yeridim are the fears. So people would go for a month at a time, or let's say nowadays you have the country, let's say, or things like that, where people will be gathering for 4 or 5, 6 weeks or more. So then, Yesha Amr, you should say it. So in other words, like this, what comes out from here is like this, that think about it like this. What was the reason? This is why I told you the reason. It's important to remember. What was the reason why they made it in the first place? Because of mazikim. Because they're afraid someone's going to walk home by themselves. If you do a pop-up minyan in your house, then they never made a gzeda like that in the first place. Okay? Now, you're going to tell me, well, there's no more mazikim now anyways. We don't have shadim. So it's true. Once you made a gzeda, you keep the gzeda. But the gzeda was never made for in your own house if you make a pop-up minyan. Even back then, the gzeda was only for shul. So if you go to shul, okay, we keep the minyan, that's the way it always was. But if you're doing it in your house, then you don't have to. Now, this was very relevant. Maybe you guys don't remember, but during the time of COVID, it was a long, long time ago. But basically, during the time of COVID, people were doing a lot of pop-up minyanim. So if it's a pop-up minyan that was literally once or twice, you don't do it. But if it was a pop-up for more, then you do. Now, I won't say you don't do it, because that's not what the Alter Rebbe says. The Alter Rebbe says it's our minhag not to. However, if someone has a minhag they do, you let them. So I remember once, it was in, we talked did a minyan once in my building where I lived then. and they said it. So I was the chazan was someone that's in knew how to learn. I don't know. So I was talking to him about it after. But the Kitzur, people don't know this halacha, but it's not really relevant because the point we say it. So again, you don't have to if you're short on time and you're in a pop-up minyan. But how often does that happen? Usually you're in a shul, you're in a place where you daven more often, so we do it. But if in theory you're in a place you're only doing a very short one-time minyan, then you wouldn't. So let's say you have a conference or something, you wouldn't do it. Yeah, technically, even if you guys went on a Shabbaton, technically, if you guys went on a Shabbaton summer for 1 week, that would count as probably not needing to do it either. However, as we said, we don't nowadays we do it, it looks like. And the Alter Rebbe says you can do it, so it's no problem. But just to understand, the Inyan where it came from was an interesting halacha. It's like when you think about why things start and where they end off, it's good to know these things. Yeah. Why do you? Why not? It's not a bracha. It's not a bracha. Why not? Saying it's a nice tefillah. Why not? Veichulu is you should say. And Magen Avis, it's a main Shabbat. It doesn't seem, there's no reason why not to. Okay, thank you all for joining.